The radio crackled with desperation at 3:47 hours, Eastern Standard Time. Broken arrow. We have 8 friendlies pinned down. Grid coordinates 41 SUB 23,480, 765,432. Heavy machine gun fire from elevated positions. Multiple RPGs inbound. We need immediate close air support or we're not making it out of here. Staff Sergeant Marcus Tank Rodriguez pressed his body deeper into the rocky outcrop, feeling the sting of granite fragments as another burst of AK-47 fire erupted from the ridgeline above. Blood trickled down his forehead from where shrapnel had kissed his helmet. Around him, 7 other Navy SEALs maintained their defensive perimeter, but their ammunition was running critically low. The mission had gone sideways fast. What was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance of a suspected weapons cache had turned into a full-scale ambush in the remote mountains of Afghanistan's Kunar province. Viper 1-1, this is Overlord, came the response from the Tactical Operations Center, static heavy through the encrypted channel. We copy your emergency. Be advised, closest available CAS is 23 minutes out. Can you hold position? Tank exchanged a grim look with his team leader, Chief Petty Officer William Frost Mackenzie. They both knew 23 minutes might as well be 23 hours. The Taliban fighters had them bracketed from 3 sides, and the sound of approaching vehicles suggested reinforcements were already en route. The morning sun was beginning to paint the eastern peaks orange, which meant they'd lose the advantage of darkness within the hour. Negative, Overlord. We need immediate support. Ammunition critical, wounded personnel, and we've got company coming up the valley road. Tank's voice remained steady despite the circumstances, his training overriding the adrenaline coursing through his system. The radio fell silent for 8 agonizing seconds. Then, cutting through the static like a blade, came a voice none of them recognized, calm, professional, with the slight twang of someone from the American Southwest. Viper 1-1, this is Ghost Rider. I'm 3 clicks north of your position, Angels Low. I can be overhead in 90 seconds. What's your target situation? Frost grabbed the radio handset, confusion evident in his voice. Ghost Rider, we show no available air assets in sector. Confirm your aircraft type and authorization. Another pause. The distinctive whine of turbofan engines began to echo off the canyon walls, growing louder by the second. Viper 1-1, Ghost Rider is 1 A-10C Thunderbolt, single ship, weapons hot. I've got eyes on muzzle flashes from your 12 o'clock high. Preparing for gun run. Keep your heads down, gentlemen. The SEALs looked at each other in disbelief. A lone A-10 Warthog, arriving without escort or apparent authorization, flown by someone whose voice wasn't in any of their mission briefings. Tank keyed the radio one more time as the sound of the approaching aircraft grew to a thunderous roar. Ghost Rider, we didn't request a single-ship engagement. Where's your wingman? The response came back with a hint of dry humor that somehow cut through the tension. Viper 1-1, sometimes the cavalry rides alone. Lieutenant Colonel Esperanza, Ez, Vasquez had been airborne for 3 hours when the distress call crackled through her headset. She wasn't supposed to be in this sector. Hell, she wasn't supposed to be flying at all according to the flight schedule posted back at Bagram. But sleep had eluded her again, the familiar insomnia that had plagued her since her last deployment, and the pre-dawn darkness of the Afghan sky had called to her like an old friend. At 34, Ez had more combat hours in the A-10 than most pilots had total flight time. Her aircraft, call sign Razorback, bore the scars of countless missions, bullet holes patched and repainted, hydraulic lines replaced more times than the maintenance crews cared to count. The nose art, a snarling Razorback hog painted in desert tan and black, had become legendary among the ground troops who knew that when Razorback appeared overhead, they were going home alive. But legends, Ez had learned, were often built on the bones of those who didn't survive to tell their own stories. 3 months ago, her wingman, Captain Torres Viper Gutierrez, had taken a surface-to-air missile during a close air support mission near Kandahar. Ez had watched the explosion tear through his aircraft, had heard his final transmission, a calm Ez, "Tell my wife I love her," before his A-10 augured into the desert floor. The official investigation found no fault with her tactics or decision-making, but the guilt sat heavy in her chest like undigested lead. Tonight, she'd taken off unauthorized, using a maintenance flight authorization she'd backdated to cover her tracks. She needed to feel the controls in her hands, needed to remember why she'd fallen in love with flying in the first place. The A-10 responded to her touch like a faithful horse, its twin General Electric TF-34 engines purring with reliable power as she maintained a loose orbit over the Hindu Kush Mountains. When the broken arrow call came through on the emergency frequency, every instinct in her body screamed for action. She'd worked with SEALs before, professional, competent warriors who didn't call for help unless the situation was truly desperate. Her eyes quickly found the grid coordinates on her moving map display, calculating distance, fuel consumption, and weapons deployment profiles in the span of heartbeats. The tactical picture painted itself in her mind with crystalline clarity. 8 friendlies in a defensive position, enemy forces in elevated terrain with crew-served weapons. A textbook close air support scenario, except for one critical factor: she was alone. Standard doctrine called for a minimum of 2 aircraft for this type of mission, with one providing overwatch while the other engaged. Flying solo into a hot landing zone violated every rule in the book. Ez rolled Razorback into a steep descent, her eyes scanning the terrain ahead through her night vision goggles. The green-tinted world below revealed muzzle flashes winking from the ridgeline like deadly fireflies. She could see the SEAL's position, a small cluster of heat signatures pressed against the rocks, surrounded by the advancing thermal blooms of enemy fighters. Captain Alina Hammer Kowalski had been flying A-10s for 8 years, but she'd never seen anything like what unfolded in the pre-dawn darkness over Kunar province. As the duty officer in the Tactical Operations Center at Bagram Airfield, she monitored the radio traffic with growing alarm. An unauthorized aircraft had inserted itself into an active combat situation, and according to the flight tracking system, there were no scheduled sorties in that sector. "Sir, we have a problem," she reported to Colonel James Hawk Patterson, the operations commander who had just arrived in the TOC after being roused from his quarters. Patterson, a 20-year veteran with silver temples and the bearing of someone who'd seen too many young aircrew not come home, studied the situation display with practiced eyes. "Who authorized this mission?" he demanded, his voice carrying the edge that made junior officers straighten their spines. "That's just it, sir. There's no authorization on file. Ghost Rider is showing as Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez in tail number 790154, but she's not on the flight schedule. Aircraft was supposed to be down for routine maintenance." Patterson's jaw tightened. He knew Ez Vasquez's reputation, one of the best stick-and-rudder pilots in the theater, with a kill record that spoke for itself. But going off mission, especially after losing her wingman, indicated the kind of judgment problems that ended careers and got people killed. "Get me a direct line to Ghost Rider," he ordered. The radio operator's hands flew over his controls. Ghost Rider, this is Overlord Actual. Respond immediately." Ez's voice came back through the speakers, calm and professional despite the chaos erupting around her. "Overlord Actual, Ghost Rider. I'm kind of busy right now." Through her aircraft's targeting pod, Ez could see the full scope of the Taliban ambush. At least 20 fighters had positioned themselves in a horseshoe formation around the SEAL's position, with crew-served weapons providing overlapping fields of fire. Several technical vehicles, pickup trucks mounting heavy machine guns, were approaching from the valley floor, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. The geometry of the engagement was all wrong for a single aircraft. Proper tactics would have one A-10 engaging the elevated positions, while another worked the vehicles in the valley. Solo, she'd have to sequence her attacks carefully, using the terrain to mask her approach, and hopping the enemy didn't have any nasty surprises waiting. Viper 1-1, Ghost Rider. I've got 20-plus personnel in fighting positions along the ridgeline, and at least 3 vehicles approaching your 6 o'clock. I'm going to work the high ground first, then swing around for the vehicles. When I call guns, 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 keep your heads down and stay tight to that rock face. The lead SEAL's voice crackled back. Copy, Ghost Rider. We're running low on everything here. Make it count. Ez smiled grimly inside her helmet. Making it count was what she did best. She rolled Razorback into a diving attack, the A-10's distinctive silhouette cutting through the darkness like an avenging angel. The sound hit the Taliban fighters first, the low, menacing growl of twin turbofans that every insurgent in Afghanistan had learned to fear. Then came the muzzle flashes from above, not the sharp cracks of their own weapons, but something far more terrifying. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon beneath Ghost Rider's nose began its deadly song. 90 rounds in a 2-second burst, each depleted uranium projectile traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, capable of punching through tank armor. Against personnel in open terrain, the effect was apocalyptic. The ridgeline erupted in clouds of pulverized stone and dust as the 30 rounds walked across the enemy positions with surgical precision. Ez pulled out of her dive at 500 feet above ground level, already calculating her next attack vector. The crew-served weapons had gone silent, permanently, but the vehicles in the valley were still advancing. She could see muzzle flashes from their passengers as they returned fire at her aircraft, the green tracers falling well short of her altitude. Ghost Riders off target, coming around for vehicles in the valley. Viper 1-1, you should have some breathing room now. Tank's voice carried a note of amazement. Ghost Rider, we confirm multiple enemy KIA on the ridgeline. Outstanding shooting. We've got visual on 3 technical vehicles approaching from the south, approximately 800 meters and closing. Roger that, Viper. I see them. This next pass is going to be danger close. I need you all to stay exactly where you are until I call all clear. Ez brought Razorback around in a sweeping left turn, using a spur of the mountain to mask her approach. The technical vehicles had no idea death was stalking them from above. Their drivers, emboldened by the silence from their comrades on the ridge, were pushing hard toward the SEAL's position. The first vehicle disappeared in a fireball as a single Maverick missile found its mark. The explosion lit up the valley floor like daylight, revealing the other 2 vehicles in stark detail. Ez lined up on the second truck, her finger finding the cannon trigger as the GAU-8 spun up to firing speed once more. The 30 rounds shredded the technical vehicle like paper, the tungsten core bullets continuing through the truck and into the rocky ground beyond. The third vehicle, seeing the fate of its companions, attempted a desperate U-turn. It made it halfway around before Ez's second burst caught it broadside, turning it into a burning monument to the folly of ambushing American forces. Viper 1-1, Ghost Rider, all threats neutralized. I'm going to maintain overwatch while you consolidate your position. Back at Bagram, Colonel Patterson watched the engagement unfold through the eyes of a Predator drone that had finally arrived on station. The tactical display showed a textbook example of close air support, precise, devastating, and executed with a level of skill that few pilots possessed. But his anger at the unauthorized mission hadn't diminished. "Get me that helicopter," he ordered. "Those SEALs need immediate extraction, and I want Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez back here for debriefing the moment she lands." Captain Kowalski coordinated with the rescue helicopter already en route, while monitoring Ghost Rider's fuel status on her display. Ez was running low, not critically, but with enough margin for concern if the situation developed further complications. Ghost Rider Overlord, we have Pedro inbound for CASEVAC ETA 12 minutes. What's your fuel status? Overlord, Ghost Rider shows 2,800 pounds remaining. Good for another 30 minutes on station. It was a careful dance, the math of combat aviation. Fuel, ammunition, threats, and time, variables that could shift in seconds and determine who lived or died. Ez maintained a lazy orbit overhead the SEAL's position, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign of additional enemy activity. The HH-60 Pave Hawk appeared as a blip on her radar first, then as twin-rotor discs visible through her night vision system. The helicopter crew, call sign Pedro 27, had made this run dozens of times before. They knew the terrain, knew the threats, and most importantly, knew that the A-10 overhead had already cleared the immediate area of anything that might threaten their approach. Pedro 27, Ghost Rider. LZ is secure, no observed enemy activity. Recommend approach from the north to avoid potential observation from the valley. The helicopter crew acknowledged and began their descent into the confined landing zone the SEALs had marked with infrared strobes. Ez watched the extraction unfold with professional satisfaction. 8 warriors who had stared death in the face were going home to fight another day. As the Pave Hawk lifted off with its precious cargo, Ez allowed herself a moment to appreciate the sunrise painting the Hindu Kush peaks in shades of gold and crimson. It was beautiful in a way that photos could never capture, the raw majesty of Afghanistan's mountains, indifferent to the human conflicts played out in their shadows. The flight back to Bagram was uneventful, but Ez knew the real challenge was just beginning. She'd violated flight procedures, operated outside the chain of command, and committed an aircraft to combat without authorization. In the military's rigid structure, results didn't always justify methods, no matter how successful the outcome. As Razorback's landing gear touched down on the runway at Bagram, Ez could see Colonel Patterson waiting near the maintenance hangar, his posture radiating displeasure. She shut down the engines and began her post-flight checklist, already formulating her explanation for the unauthorized mission. The truth was simple enough. She'd heard Americans in trouble and had responded. Everything else, regulations, procedures, career implications, came secondary to that fundamental obligation. It was a principle that had guided her through 11 years of military service, and she wasn't about to abandon it now. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, Wrench, Martinez had been maintaining A-10s for 22 years, and he could read an aircraft like a book. As Ez climbed down from Razorback's cockpit, he immediately began his post-mission inspection, his trained eyes cataloging every detail that might indicate battle damage or mechanical stress. "How's she running, Colonel?" Wrench asked, his weathered hands already checking hydraulic levels and examining the GAU-8 cannon barrels for wear. "Like a dream, Chief. She brought us all home safe." Ez pulled off her helmet, running fingers through sweat-dampened hair. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced by the bone-deep weariness that followed every combat mission. Colonel Patterson approached with measured steps, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, I need to see you in my office immediately." "Yes, sir." Ez handed her helmet to Wrench and followed Patterson toward the operations building. Behind them, the maintenance crew swarmed over Razorback, beginning the detailed inspection that would determine if the aircraft was ready for its next mission. The walk to Patterson's office felt longer than usual, past the mission planning rooms where other aircrews were preparing for the day's sorties, past the intelligence briefing areas where analysts pored over satellite imagery and radio intercepts. The base was waking up to another day in America's longest war, and Ez had just reminded everyone why the A-10 remained irreplaceable in this environment. Patterson's office was spartanly decorated, a few commendation plaques on the wall, a photo of his family back in Colorado, and a map of Afghanistan marked with the locations of significant air operations. He gestured for Ez to take a seat across from his desk, then fixed her with the stern gaze that had intimidated countless junior officers over the years. "Explain yourself," he said simply. Ez met his gaze without flinching. "Sir, I was airborne conducting a maintenance test flight when I monitored an emergency frequency transmission. 8 Navy SEALs were under heavy fire and requesting immediate close air support. I was the only available asset in the area." "You were not authorized to be airborne, Lieutenant Colonel. That aircraft was scheduled for routine maintenance." "Yes, sir. I took responsibility for authorizing the test flight based on maintenance requirements that I felt needed immediate attention." Patterson's eyes narrowed. Both officers knew she was walking a fine line between creative interpretation and outright insubordination. "And you felt qualified to engage multiple targets in close proximity to friendly forces without backup or higher authorization." "Sir, the tactical situation required immediate action. The SEALs indicated they had critical ammunition shortages and wounded personnel. 23 minutes for the next available CAS would have been too late." The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying Ez with the careful attention of someone trying to separate the wheat from the chaff. Her record spoke for itself: over 200 combat hours, multiple commendations, and a reputation among ground forces that bordered on legendary. But going off mission, especially after losing tours, indicated judgment problems that couldn't be ignored. "Lieutenant Colonel, you're one of our most experienced pilots. Your tactical skills are beyond question, but you violated standing orders, committed an aircraft to combat without authorization, and operated outside the chain of command. Those actions have consequences." Ez nodded, having expected this conversation from the moment she'd rolled Razorback into that first attack run. "I understand, sir. I accept full responsibility for my actions." Patterson was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desk surface. Outside the window, the daily rhythm of Bagram continued: helicopters lifting off for medical evacuations, cargo aircraft bringing in supplies, and fighter jets launching for patrol missions over a country that seemed perpetually balanced on the edge of chaos. "The SEALs you saved this morning," Patterson finally said. "Their mission was time-sensitive intelligence gathering. The weapons cache they were investigating contained components for improvised explosive devices that intelligence estimates would have killed dozens of coalition personnel over the coming months. Your actions this morning didn't just save 8 lives, they potentially saved dozens more." Ez remained silent, unsure where the colonel was leading. "That said," Patterson continued, "I can't have pilots making unilateral decisions about when and where to employ military assets. The chain of command exists for a reason, and discipline is what separates a professional military from an armed mob." The weight of impending punishment settled on Ez's shoulders. She'd known the risks when she'd made the decision to engage, but knowing and accepting were two different things. Her career had been built on calculated risks and aggressive tactics, but this time the calculation might have been wrong. "Sir, Patterson held up a hand, cutting off her response. "I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross for your actions this morning. Exceptional heroism in aerial combat against an armed enemy force. Additionally, I'm placing a formal letter of counseling in your personnel file regarding unauthorized flight operations and violation of standing procedures." Ez blinked in surprise. She'd expected punishment, possibly severe. A medal and a slap on the wrist seemed almost too good to be true. "Sir, I don't understand." Patterson's expression softened slightly, revealing the concerned commander beneath the stern disciplinarian. "Lieutenant Colonel, you've been pushing the envelope since Torres was killed, taking unnecessary risks, volunteering for every dangerous mission, and now flying unauthorized sorties. I recognize the signs because I've been there myself." The mention of Torres hit Ez like a physical blow. 3 months later, and the guilt still felt fresh, raw. Torres had been more than just a wingman. He'd been a friend, a mentor to younger pilots, and a devoted husband whose wife was expecting their first child. With respect, sir, this has nothing to do with Torres. Doesn't it? Patterson leaned forward, his voice taking on a gentler tone. You're one of the finest combat pilots I've ever commanded, but you can't save everyone, and you can't bring back the ones we've lost by taking unnecessary risks. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Wanted to argue, to insist that her actions had been purely tactical, driven by the immediate needs of the situation. But deep down, she knew Patterson was right. The guilt over Tor's death had been driving her decisions, pushing her to take risks that a more objective pilot might have avoided. The SEALs you saved this morning are alive because of your skill and courage, Patterson continued. But they're also alive because you got lucky. Next time, there might not be enough luck to go around. Nodded slowly, finally understanding the colonel's position. The medal recognized her tactical excellence and the successful outcome of the mission. The letter of counseling served notice that future violations would carry more severe consequences. I won't let it happen again, sir. I know you won't, but I also know you'll keep pushing the boundaries because that's what makes you effective in this environment. Just remember that dead heroes don't save anyone. As left Patterson's office, she found herself thinking about the 8 SEALs now safe at the base hospital, receiving treatment for their wounds and debriefing about their mission. Tank Rodriguez, the sergeant who'd coordinated with her during the engagement, had already sent word through the chain of command requesting to meet with the pilot who'd saved his team. The base hospital smelled of antiseptic and determination, the institutional odors common to military medical facilities worldwide. Found Tank in one of the private rooms, his forehead bearing fresh stitches from the shrapnel wound he'd sustained during the ambush. Despite his injuries, his eyes were alert and focused as she entered the room. "You must be Ghost Rider," he said, extending his hand. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, but everyone calls me Tank." "Lieutenant Colonel Esperanza Vasquez, works fine." Tank's grip was firm, the handshake of someone accustomed to relying on others in life-or-death situations. "Colonel, I've got to tell you, I've worked with a lot of air support over the years, but what you did this morning was something special. Flying solo into that mess, taking out those positions with surgical precision. That's the kind of flying they write about in the textbooks." Felt uncomfortable with the praise, remembering Patterson's words about luck and unnecessary risks. "Just doing my job, Sergeant. Glad I could help bring you and your team home." "It was more than just doing your job, ma'am. You violated protocol to come help us, didn't you?" The question caught off guard. Military personnel were usually careful about acknowledging violations of regulations, even when those violations resulted in positive outcomes. Tank's directness was refreshing and slightly unsettling. "What makes you say that?" Tank's smile was knowing. "Because I've been doing this for 12 years, and I know how long it takes to coordinate close air support through proper channels. You were overhead in 90 seconds after we made that call. That doesn't happen through normal procedures." Considered her response carefully. Tank deserved honesty, but admitting to unauthorized actions could have implications beyond her conversation with Patterson. "Sometimes the situation dictates action outside normal parameters," she said finally. "Sometimes it does," Tank agreed. "And sometimes that's the difference between coming home alive and coming home in a box." They talked for another 20 minutes, Tank describing the tactical situation from the ground perspective, while explained her approach and target selection. It was a professional discussion between warriors who understood the complexities of modern combat, each appreciating the other's expertise and decisions under pressure. As prepared to leave, Tank stopped her with a final question. "Colonel, can I ask you something personal?" She nodded. You've got a reputation among the ground troops. They call you the angel of the Hindu Kush, said you've never lost a friendly unit under your protection. But this morning, flying solo into that ambush, that felt personal somehow, like you had something to prove. Ez was quiet for a moment, considering how much of herself to reveal to this battle-hardened NCO she just met. Something about Tank's direct manner and obvious intelligence made her want to be honest. "I lost my wingman 3 months ago," she said finally. "Torres Gutierrez. Good pilot, good friend. He died covering a rescue mission, and I've been questioning every tactical decision since then." Tank nodded slowly. "Survivor's guilt. I've seen it before. Hell, I've felt it myself. But Colonel, if you don't mind me saying so, your friend didn't die so you could get yourself killed proving a point. He died so people like my team could come home alive. Honor that sacrifice by staying alive yourself." The words hit Ez with surprising force. She'd expected sympathy or empty platitudes, not the kind of hard truth that cut straight to the heart of her emotional struggle. Tank had managed to articulate something she'd been unable to express herself, that her risk-taking wasn't honoring Tor's memory, it was potentially wasting the sacrifice he'd made. "Thank you, Sergeant, I needed to hear that." "We all need to hear hard truths sometimes, ma'am. Just glad I could return a small favor after what you did for us this morning." As Ez walked back toward the flight line, she found herself thinking about legacy and responsibility in new ways. Torres hadn't died to give her license for reckless heroics. He died believing in the mission, in the importance of bringing Americans home alive. Her job wasn't to join him in death, but to continue the work they'd started together. The afternoon briefing for the next day's missions was held in the main operations center, a windowless room filled with tactical displays and communication equipment. Pilots and weapons systems officers crowded around the briefing podium as the intelligence officer presented the latest threat assessments and target priorities. Ez took her usual seat in the back row, listening to the familiar litany of enemy positions, weather forecasts, and mission parameters. The routine was comforting in its predictability, the same professional attention to detail that had kept American aircrews alive through decades of conflict. "Ladies and gentlemen," the intelligence officer concluded, "we have confirmation that this morning's engagement in Kunar province eliminated a significant IED manufacturing operation. Initial battle damage assessment indicates complete destruction of the facility and neutralization of approximately 20 enemy personnel. Outstanding work by all personnel involved." A ripple of recognition passed through the assembled aircrew members. News traveled fast in a combat theater, and Ez's unauthorized mission was already becoming the subject of mess hall speculation and flight line rumors. She felt the eyes of her fellow pilots on her, some admiring, others disapproving of her violation of procedures. Captain Rachel "Torch" Williams, one of the younger A-10 pilots, approached Ez after the briefing concluded. Williams was aggressive and confident, reminding Ez of herself at that age, all sharp edges and burning ambition to prove herself in combat. "Colonel, I wanted to congratulate you on this morning's mission. That was some seriously aggressive flying." "Thank you, Captain. But remember, it's not about being aggressive, it's about being effective." Williams's enthusiasm was undimmed. "Yes, ma'am, but sometimes effectiveness requires pushing the boundaries. I mean, if you'd waited for proper coordination, those SEALs would be dead." Ez studied the younger pilot's face, seeing the same hunger for combat glory that had driven her own early career. Williams was talented, no question, but she was also at the age where immortality seemed guaranteed and consequences were abstractions. "Captain, let me give you some advice. The moment you start believing your own legend is the moment you stop being effective. Every mission is different, every tactical situation unique. What worked this morning might get you killed tomorrow if you try to apply it without thinking." Williams looked slightly deflated. having expected encouragement for aggressive tactics rather than caution about their limitations. I understand, ma'am, but surely there are times when— There are times when breaking the rules is necessary, Ez interrupted. But those times are rare, and they require judgment that only comes with experience. Don't be in such a hurry to find those moments that you create them artificially. It was a conversation Ez had with younger pilots regularly, trying to pass on hard-won wisdom about the balance between aggression and prudence. The temptation to be a hero was powerful, especially in a combat environment where heroics were often rewarded with medals and recognition. But Ez had learned that true heroism lay not in seeking glory, but in consistently making the right tactical decisions under pressure. Sometimes that meant taking extraordinary risks. More often it meant exercising restraint and following procedures that had been written in the blood of previous generations of warriors. The next morning brought news that would reshape Ez's understanding of her unauthorized mission. Colonel Patterson summoned her to his office again, this time accompanied by a civilian in a dark suit, who introduced himself only as Mr. Johnson from Washington. "Lieutenant Colonel," Patterson began, "we've received additional intelligence about the weapons cache your actions prevented from being distributed. Mr. Johnson has some information that provides context for yesterday's engagement." Johnson opened a classified folder and spread several photographs across Patterson's desk. The images showed sophisticated electronic components, clearly military in origin, arranged around what appeared to be the remnants of improvised explosive devices. "Colonel Vasquez, the materials you helped prevent from reaching insurgent networks weren't just standard IED components. These were advanced electronic warfare devices, designed to interfere with coalition radio communications and jam GPS signals. Their deployment would have significantly degraded our operational effectiveness across the entire regional theater." Ez studied the photographs, recognizing some of the components from intelligence briefings about emerging threats. The implications were staggering. Entire operations could have been compromised, aircraft shot down, ground units isolated and destroyed. "How did insurgents obtain this level of technology?" she asked. Johnson's expression was grim. "That's still under investigation, but preliminary analysis suggests foreign state involvement, probably through intermediary networks. This wasn't just another Taliban weapons cache. It was part of a sophisticated effort to level the technological playing field." Patterson leaned forward, his earlier concerns about unauthorized missions now overshadowed by the strategic implications of the intelligence. "Ez, your actions yesterday didn't just save 8 SEALs. You potentially prevented a significant shift in the tactical balance of this conflict." The weight of that revelation settled on Ez's shoulders like a heavy pack. She'd made a split-second decision based on immediate tactical needs, never considering the broader strategic implications. Pure chance had placed her in position to intercept a threat that intelligence agencies were probably still trying to fully understand. "Sir, I had no knowledge of the strategic significance. I was responding to an immediate threat to American personnel." "I know that," Patterson replied, "which makes your actions even more significant. You made the right tactical decision for the right reasons, and the strategic benefits were a bonus." Johnson closed the folder and stood to leave. "Colonel Vasquez, people in Washington are very interested in this operation. Your name has come up in some very high-level discussions about future tactical requirements and pilot training programs." After Johnson left, Patterson and Ez sat in silence for several minutes, both contemplating the implications of what they'd learned. Strategic significance was often invisible at the tactical level. Pilots and ground forces focused on immediate threats, while intelligence analysts and policymakers worried about broader patterns and implications. "Sir, does this change anything about yesterday's events?" Patterson smiled for the first time since Ez had entered his office. It confirms that good tactical judgment often produces strategic benefits, even when the pilot doesn't know she's making strategic decisions. But it doesn't change the fact that you violated procedures and operated outside the chain of command. The letter of counseling would remain in her file, a reminder that results didn't automatically justify methods. But the Distinguished Flying Cross recommendation had gained additional weight, supported now not just by tactical excellence, but by strategic significance that reached beyond the immediate engagement. 2 weeks later, Ez found herself standing at attention in front of Bagram's base theater, surrounded by the full complement of aircrew and support personnel. The medal ceremony was a formal affair, with representatives from higher headquarters in attendance and media personnel documenting the event for distribution to stateside audiences. General Patricia "Iron Lady" Morrison, the theater air commander, read the citation with the practiced cadence of someone who'd performed this duty dozens of times. For extraordinary heroism in aerial combat against an armed enemy force. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, flying alone and without backup, engaged multiple enemy positions in close proximity to friendly forces, neutralizing significant threats and enabling the successful extraction of coalition personnel. The medal itself was surprisingly heavy as General Morrison pinned it to Ez's dress uniform. The Distinguished Flying Cross, awarded for heroism in aerial combat, carried the weight of history. Previous recipients included some of the greatest names in American military aviation. But as she stood there, Ez found herself thinking not about personal recognition, but about the 8 SEALs who'd returned safely to their families, about Torres Gutierrez who hadn't, and about the countless other warriors whose stories would never make it into official citations or medal ceremonies. After the ceremony, Tank Rodriguez approached her in the reception area. His wounds had healed cleanly, and he was preparing to return to operations with his SEAL team. The handshake they exchanged carried the weight of shared experience and mutual respect. "Congratulations, Colonel. Well deserved." "Thank you, Sergeant. How are you and your team adjusting to being back?" Tank's expression grew serious. "We're good, ma'am. Ready to get back out there. But I wanted you to know, the word has spread through the special operations community about what you did. Ghost Rider has become something of a legend among the door kickers." Ez was uncomfortable with the legendary status, remembering Patterson's warnings about believing one's own mythology. "I hope that legend emphasizes teamwork and proper procedures, not freelancing and unauthorized missions." "It emphasizes results, ma'am, and the willingness to put Americans' lives ahead of career considerations." The comment struck Ez as both a compliment and a challenge. She'd made a decision based on immediate tactical needs, but the long-term implications of that decision were still unfolding. The strategic intelligence they'd prevented from being distributed, the lives saved both directly and indirectly, the precedent set for future operations.